Hi, my name is Mitchell. I'm the founder of Securemetrics, and in this video I'm going to take you through a quick demo of the Power BI report that comes with our Security Metrics Toolkit. As a quick background, the toolkit comes with both this Power BI template file, which is this report that you're looking at now, as well as an Excel template file. In the Excel template file, you'll define your metrics in the inventory sheet, and that's where you'll define, hey, here's all the metrics that we're tracking, here's kind of the details about them, the targets, and then there's a log sheet where everyone will collaborate, and ideally metric owners will calculate their measurements, they'll enter their measurements into the log file, and all of that data gets centralized into this report. And the idea is to centralize and formalize your security metrics program. We're collecting metrics and measurements across a security program, everything's siloed, but being able to put some formal pieces around there and then ultimately visualize it and interact with it and consume it in a centralized manner is really what this template is focused on. Now the template has 4 different pages that comes with the template. You have the metrics matrix, and this is your complete overview of your security metrics program. It's got all your active metrics, what are the current values, it'll help you understand what areas or metrics need your attention. And so if you want to get an overview of a metrics program, which can get quite large, especially as we start going across domains and teams and business units, it can get really challenging, and this is, we found a really effective way for someone to hop in, take a look at the metrics program, and be able to understand where their attention needs to be. There's metric cards, which we'll get into in a second, but these are individual cards that show data for a single metric. Target deviation cards are very similar, just a little bit of a different way to look at the data from a charting perspective. We'll cover that in a minute here as well. And then the inventory is really your central inventory of, hey, here's all our metrics, here's what they are, why we're tracking them, who owns them, and it's really critical that these metrics are documented. You have some sort of inventory of them that's documented. You know when they were introduced, when they were retired, and this is really critical because the metrics become the most beneficial when you consistently track them over time. That allows comparison. If we're tracking a metric for only a month or two and then we tracking other metrics, you're always going to be retiring stuff, right? But being able to say, hey, here's our metrics program, here's what we track, here's why we track it, is really critical. Let's start, however, on the metrics matrix. So I'll take a short deep dive into each of these pages. The matrix, like I mentioned, is your complete overview of your security metrics program. And it's a pretty simple but really powerful, we found, way of visualizing an entire metrics program and giving you the tools to get an overview and understand where your importance matters. Before I dive into all the content on here, the first thing you've probably noticed is we have these red dots, right? We have some red dot here, we got some red dots over here. These are called action dots. And the action dots denote a metric that needs your attention. So it's really just, hey, come look here. And I should have had an example here, but if you don't have these action dots, there's just a ton of data. And so you gotta sit there and you gotta compare, and we gotta go metric by metric and understand looking at the data, and then, you know, doing some thinking, right? And it's pretty easy stuff, but it's tedious, right? And it makes this really hard to digest. The action dots denote a metric where the actual value, which is the most recent measurement for that metric, does not meet the target. And keep in mind, you can configure the metrics, is higher better or is lower better. Number of hours, right, we probably want to be lower. Number of endpoints with EDR, we probably want that to be higher, right? So the behavior there is opposite, but does not meet the target or exceed the target. It's flagged with an action dot. So this can tell us, hey, all these are either meeting or exceeding their targets. Our phishing click-through rate is not, Our percent of workstations covered by EDR is not. So that's a little bit on the action dots. On the metrics matrix page, we have the metric types table, and this shows the different types of metrics. This is aligned to NIST 855. If you're new to measurement and metrics programs, that's a great standard that kind of lays out how do we pick metrics and then how do we build a metrics program. And this template absolutely aligns with NIST 855 guidelines. And there's NIST outlines 4 different metric types in a security metrics program. You have implementation metrics, efficiency, effectiveness, and impact. They'll show us that type. We'll flag it with an action dot if there's metrics in that type that need attention, and then the number of metrics in that that are that metric type. So I can filter on just by clicking our implementation metrics. If I just want to look at efficiency metrics, I can do that. Similar vein, we have the metric groups. The difference being is a group you can set. So it's just a text field. A metric can be in only one group at a time, but it gives you a way to essentially tag that metric into some sort of grouping. In this case, we've done the groupings as essentially domains, right? We have data security, email security, security operations, but you can tag it in any way or create any grouping schema that you want. But we lay out those different groups, the number of metrics, and then we flag with an action dot any group that has metrics that need attention. I could look at the data security, I could look at configuration management, or third-party risk management just by clicking here. The core of this page is the actual metrics matrix, and it lays out the metric ID. So this is an ID that you'll set. It's essentially a unique identifier. What is the actual metric? And again, we'll flag that metric with an action dot if it needs attention. What is the actual value? So the actual value is when was it the value from the last measurement. The target value, which is set by you, and then the delta. What's the difference, right, between the actual and the target? We'll put the owner right here on this page. We find that generally pretty important. Where in a security metrics program, you're generally not going to have just one person responsible for all these metrics, especially as we get into larger programs. Having the owner right here makes it a lot easier instead of digging out, who's in charge of providing measurements or, in charge of overseeing that metric. We have the owner right here for you. And then the date that it was last measured. So we can see most of these were measured on a specific day, and this is just sample data here. Some of them were not, so this will tell you when that last measured. You can also think of it as this is telling you the date that this actual value is coming from. Now you'll notice the metrics are grouped, in this case by type. So we have our effectiveness, efficiency, impact, implementation. You can collapse any of these categories here and expand them. What's really interesting about this is we can actually group the table by different groups. So right now we're grouping it by metric types. We can also group it by owner. So then we have all the metrics by their owner. I can collapse any of these groups here. And then we can also group by your actual grouping that you've defined here. So you select your grouping, and then you have your different groups here. In this case, we've set it up to kind of loosely represent security domains. So this is the metrics matrix. Gives you an overview of all your metrics. It'll only be your active metrics, which differs a little bit from the inventory here. Let's head over to the metric cards. So this is a template for a single page. You might be thinking, oh, well, Mitchell, I really want to visualize more than 8 metrics, which is what we have set up on this page here. The intention is you can create as many of these KPI kind of metric cards pages as you want. You could group them in different ways, right? Maybe we want a page that shows our endpoint security metrics. Maybe we want a couple pages for security operations. You can show whatever metrics you want on the pages, and you can create as many pages as you want. You can resize these cards. So maybe you don't want 8 here. Maybe you want 7 and you want to change the sizing. You can make them bigger. You can make them smaller. You can delete cards. If you make them smaller, you could add cards. The only caveat being if you make them smaller, it can get difficult to read. We found that this layout works best with 8 metrics on a page, but you can do whatever you would like and suits kind of the use case and the audience that you have. You set up all the different metrics here, so you can choose. Each card shows data for one metric, but it doesn't have to be in order like we kind of have it here. You can show any metric you want on a card. You can configure it, what metric is showing on the card. The card layout, there's 2 sections we have that we call the detail section is this top piece, then the visualization or charting section is the bottom piece here. In the details section, you have the metric ID, what's the metric, the current value, the change, the target, and then if it's on target or off target. The on target and off target, keep in mind, will reference how you configure the metric is higher better or is lower better. In the charting section here, it's actually not charting the actual value of the metric. It's charting the percent of the target achieved. It's doing that over, by default, the last 6 measurements. So each of these points on the line chart represents a measurement. You can change that. So if we want to pull fewer, maybe only the last 3, or we want to pull more, you can pull as many as you want. It'll get hard, eventually if you pull enough data points in there to see the actual measurement or the points here. You could turn those off if you wanted, right, and get more of a trend line approach there. So totally configurable, but it's going to pull that, and it's going to graph essentially what is the percent of the target that we would have achieved. And you'll notice they all have this dotted line on them that represents the target. The target will always be 100%, right? Because it's the 100% of the target. But this also lets us show, are we beating target? Are we under the target? What's the general trend? Is it going down? Is it going up? But the most important reason we do this is you can support almost any kind of metric in the Security Metrics Toolkit. It's not only, hey, here's our list of metrics that you can track and you can't add any. No, you can support any security metric your team can come up with pretty much, right? There might be some edge cases or crazy stuff that you can't, but we can support almost any single type of metric. You can do percentage-based metrics, like this one, the percent of workstations covered by EDR. You can do stuff in currency, cost per incident resolved, right, as an example. But if you want currency as your unit, maybe there's all kinds of stuff we could do with that, right? Budget, whatever, but we can do currency stuff. You can use decimals or ratios, right? Would be essentially, you can do ratios as decimals, like this one, analyst hours. You can do whole integers, whole numbers. You can support almost any kind of metric, and there's tons of different units, right? The problem when you graph the actual metric value is it makes comparison across the small multiples basically useless, right? Your units are all different, your y-axes are all different. When you have percent achieved, it helps you make comparisons across metrics that are very different from each other a lot easier, right? Where they're all on the same y-axis, and we're looking at percent achieved. You can get the actual value when you hover over it, right? So we can see percent achieved was 100%, but the value was 98% because our target is 98%. So that's a little bit on the metric cards. Target deviation cards are very similar idea, right? We have 8 cards. You can create as many of these pages as you would like. You configure 1 metric per card. You can change the sizing of the cards, all the same stuff, right? In fact, even the details section is the same, where we have the metric ID, metric, current value change, target value, on or off target. What does change is how we're looking at charting it. In the metric cards, right, we're charting on a line chart the percent of the target achieved. In this case, what we're actually looking at is we are looking at the deviation from the target. So this black center line is our target line, and then the bars represent how much over or under the target was the actual measurement. Now you'll notice, in this case, for example, the top bars are green. In this case example, and this one, the top bars are red. And that's denoted by is higher better or is lower better. In this case, higher is better, right? If we have 100% workstations with EDR, that's great. In this case, lower is better. If our analyst hours per incident is 5,000, that's horrid, right? Well, at least in this, in the context of kind of the numbers we have here. And so that'll show you a little bit different way. It's the same data, right? But it's showing you in a little bit of a different way. The last piece here is the metric inventory. And I won't spend too much time on this, but really this is your central inventory. And the main reason the metric inventory differs from the matrix is in two ways. The first is, this is really just if we want to need a list of, hey, here's all our metrics, here's who owns them, and here's why we measure them, right? You can set a purpose here. And the purpose is really important, right? Because a lot of teams, we start measuring stuff that doesn't really matter, right? We should have a really defined purpose and reason for why we're measuring and collecting a metric. And ultimately, right, that purpose needs to be to drive some action. We shouldn't be measuring or worrying about anything in a metrics program that we can't realistically take action on based on the results of that measurement. Similar thing here though, it lets us group by type, by owner, tells us if it's active, and this is the other important piece, is our metrics matrix will only show metrics that are active, right? Active in the program. We eventually might want to retire certain metrics. Maybe it's not adding value. Maybe it's been superseded by a different metric. Maybe it's just too hard to collect, right, for the value that it provides. There's all kinds of reasons we would get rid of a metric. We could just delete it, but it's nice to have a record of here's the metrics we used to track, here's when they were introduced, here's when they were retired, and here's the ones that we are actively measuring on a specific cadence. So you can set the ones that are active. This one, you can see we retired. Wasn't adding any value. You can put whatever reason you want here. You have the data was retired, the owner, the purpose, the metric, and the number of measurements as well. So that can help you track how many measurements there are for certain metrics. You can filter this by the type, by the group. If I want to only look at active, or maybe I just want to look at everything that's been retired, which is only one in this case, you can do that. Only want to look at cloud security, etc. So that is the Power BI template. I hope this was helpful. Definitely, we found this to be a super simple, easy way. You can get this set up in about 10 minutes, just adding some metrics to the Excel template, load it up, and publish this out. But we found this is a really great way to visualize a security metrics program. And solving this challenge means you can focus on more of what's actually important, right? Is defining what metrics to track, getting the actual measurements, and then most importantly, looking at the data and making decisions based off those measurements. So again, I appreciate you sticking around with me for 18 minutes. I hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions, definitely reach out.